January 14th, 1944. RAF Steeple Morden, England. Major Francis Gabreski stands beside his P-47 Thunderbolt, watching ground crews bolt something onto his fighter that should not exist. A massive paddle blade propeller, 13 feet of carved wood that looks more like a barn door than an aircraft component. Behind him, another crew struggles with tanks of water and methanol mixture, preparing to install an injection system that every Army Air Force manual warns could destroy the Pratt and Whitney engine in minutes. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The modifications are unauthorized at this level. The fuel mixture his aircraft will burn tomorrow violates every regulation governing combat operations. The propeller changes the aircraft's center of gravity in ways that have barely been tested. But Gabreski knows the grim mathematics that make these changes necessary. For 6 months, the 56th Fighter Group has watched German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters dance away from P-47 attacks. The enemy climbs faster, accelerates quicker, turns inside the massive American fighter at altitudes below 15,000 feet. The Luftwaffe has learned to exploit every weakness of the Thunderbolt, and American bomber crews are dying because of it. What neither Gabreski nor anyone else knows is that these 3 modifications, born from desperation and implemented through a chain of rule-breaking decisions, will transform the P-47 from a barely adequate escort fighter into a weapon system that will terrify the Luftwaffe. The combination will not add 50 miles per hour in level flight. The title's promise is hyperbole, marketing language designed to attract attention, but the truth is far more interesting. These changes will revolutionize how the P-47 fights, granting it power reserves and climbing ability that will shatter German tactical doctrine. Within months, Luftwaffe pilots will file reports claiming American fighters have been equipped with new engines. They will be half right. The engine is the same. Everything else has changed. The journey to this moment began not with engineers or generals, but with dead men. October 14th, 1943, Schweinfurt, Germany. The second mission to bomb ball-bearing factories. 291 B-17 flying fortresses depart English airfields that morning. 60 do not return. 600 men dead, wounded, or captured in a single afternoon. The mathematics of the disaster are simple and brutal. P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings escort the bombers to the German border. Beyond that line, physics defeats tactics. The fighters run out of fuel and must turn back. The bombers continue alone into what German pilots call the Toten Zone, the death zone. For 400 miles, Focke-Wulf 190As and Messerschmitt Bf 109Gs attack in waves. The flying fortresses' defensive guns account for perhaps 30 German fighters destroyed, but the bomber formations are devastated. Entire squadrons cease to exist. At the current loss rate, 8th Air Force will be effectively extinct in 8 weeks. Not defeated. Extinct. The crisis extends beyond bombing campaigns. Allied planners know that Operation Overlord, the invasion of France, cannot succeed if the Luftwaffe controls the sky above the beaches. Every analysis reaches the same conclusion. The invasion will fail unless Allied fighters can escort bombers deep into Germany, destroy the Luftwaffe in its own territory, and establish absolute air superiority. The P-47 Thunderbolt is one of 3 American fighters tasked with this mission. In October 1943, it is failing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The aircraft's problems are not mysteries. Republic Aviation's designers created a masterpiece of structural engineering. The P-47 can absorb damage that would destroy other fighters. Its 850 caliber machine guns deliver devastating firepower. Its Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, equipped with an exhaust-driven turbo supercharger, produces 2,000 horsepower and allows the aircraft to maintain performance above 30,000 feet, where thinner air cripples other fighters. At extreme altitude, the P-47 is supreme, but the Luftwaffe does not fight at extreme altitude. German fighter tacticians have studied American escort operations with scientific precision. They know the P-47's strengths and have developed counters for each. The Thunderbolt's weight, nearly 10,000 pounds empty, gives it tremendous diving speed. German pilots avoid diving contests. The P-47's turbo supercharger provides excellent high-altitude performance. German pilots attack below 15,000 feet where the supercharger's advantage diminishes. The P-47's structural strength allows extreme maneuvers. German pilots use rapid climbing attacks, exploiting the one regime where the American fighter cannot follow. The Focke-Wulf 190A represents a different design philosophy than the P-47, where the American fighter emphasizes high-altitude performance and structural strength. The German aircraft optimizes for rapid, violent attacks. The BMW 801 radial engine produces 1,700 horsepower at takeoff, less than the R 2,800, but the FW190 weighs 2,000 pounds less than the P-47. At altitudes below 15,000 feet, the German fighter climbs at 3,000 feet per minute. The P-47C, the model flying escort in late 1943, manages 2,300 feet per minute on a good day. In combat, that 600 foot per minute advantage is decisive. A Focke-Wulf pilot diving to attack bombers can execute his pass, then climb away before P-47 escorts can intercept. If an American pilot pursues, the German simply climbs. The P-47 falls behind, its engine laboring, its speed bleeding away. By the time the Thunderbolt reaches the W-190's altitude, the German has repositioned for another attack or disengaged entirely. American pilots call it running up the elevator. They watch enemies escape vertically, unable to follow, unable to protect the bombers they are sworn to defend. Francis Gabreski knows this frustration intimately. Born Francis Stanley Gabreski to Polish immigrant parents in Oil City, Pennsylvania, in 1919, he nearly washed out of flight training. An instructor deemed him too tense at the controls and lacking the touch to be a pilot. Assigned a new instructor, he barely survived elimination flights. The man who would become America's leading ace in Europe almost never earned his wings. By December 1943, Major Gabreski commands the 61st Fighter Squadron of the 56th Fighter Group. He is an ace with 5 confirmed kills. He is also frustrated. On December 11th, flying escort to Bremen, he engages a Bf-109G. The German pilot is skilled. Gabreski has the advantage initially, but low on fuel and ammunition, he cannot press the attack aggressively. The German pilot scores hits. A 20mm cannon shell lodges in Gabreski's engine without exploding, destroying the turbocharger. The Pratt and Whitney engine stops. Gabreski prepares to bail out. The P-47 falls, the propeller windmilling uselessly. At lower altitude, where ram air pressure increases and the turbocharger is less critical, the engine suddenly restarts. Gabreski nurses his damaged fighter back to England. The narrow escape reinforces what he and every other 56th Fighter Group pilot knows. The P-47 needs more power, not at 30,000 feet, where it already excels. At 15,000 feet and below, where combats actually occur. The solution begins 4,000 miles away, in Connecticut. Pratt and Whitney engineers have been working on water methanol injection systems since the late 1930s. The concept is simple. Inject a mixture of water and methanol into the engine's intake air. The water evaporates, cooling the air-fuel charge and increasing its density. Denser air contains more oxygen. More oxygen allows more fuel to be burned. More fuel burning produces more power. The methanol, a potent anti-knock compound, prevents the increased cylinder pressures from causing detonation that would destroy the engine. In theory, water methanol injection can increase the R2800's output by 400 horsepower. In practice, the system creates problems. The increased power stresses engine components. Bearing loads increase. Cylinder head temperatures rise. Exhaust valves operate at the edge of their temperature limits. Engine wear accelerates. The Army Air Force's official position is that water methanol injection is acceptable for takeoff, where maximum power is needed briefly, but not for sustained combat use. Two engineers at Pratt and Whitney's Kansas City Modification Center, Arthur Smith and Donald Hersey, think differently. They have run calculations showing that the R2800 can survive 5 minutes of water injection boosted power if cooling is adequate and if pilots observe temperature limits. 5 minutes is enough for a combat engagement. 5 minutes of an extra 400 horsepower could change everything. In the autumn of 1943, Smith and Hersey quietly install prototype water methanol systems in 3 P-47Cs at the modification center. They test the systems on the ground, monitoring engine temperatures and pressures. The engines survive. They recommend flight testing. Pratt and Whitney management declines. The official position remains that water injection is for takeoff only. Smith and Hersey know pilots in the 56th Fighter Group. Unofficial channels of communication exist between modification centers and combat units. By late 1943, these channels carry increasingly desperate requests. P-47 units need higher climb rates. They need better acceleration. They need something that will allow them to engage WWIIAviation fighters on more equal terms. Smith and Hersey inform selected pilots that water methanol systems exist, that they can be installed, and that they work. The conversation is hypothetical. Officially, nothing is being offered. Unofficially, if certain aircraft happen to arrive at the modification center for routine maintenance, certain modifications might be accomplished. In December 1943, Colonel Hubert Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, sends 3 P-47Cs to the Kansas City Modification Center for engine maintenance. They return in January 1944 with water methanol injection systems installed. The paperwork lists routine repairs. The aircraft now carry 20-gallon tanks behind the cockpit, containing a 50-50 mixture of water and methanol. A switch on the throttle activates an injection pump. When engaged, the system increases manifold pressure from 52 inches of mercury to 72 inches. At sea level, this represents an increase from 2,000 horsepower to 2,300 horsepower. The gain diminishes with altitude, but even at 15,000 feet, the system provides 300 extra horsepower for the critical 5-minute window of a typical fighter engagement. Zemke tells his pilots nothing about the modification's unofficial status. He simply instructs them to test the system in non-combat situations, observe all temperature limits, and report results. Francis Gabreski volunteers his aircraft for the first combat trial. On January 19, 1944, escorting bombers to Kiel, he engages Focke-Wulf 190s. When a German fighter initiates a climbing attack, Gabreski activates water injection and follows. The acceleration presses him back in his seat. The P-47, previously unable to maintain energy in a steep climb, now stays with the Fuhr W-190. The German pilot, expecting the American to fall behind, is shocked when Gabreski's fighter remains in position. The burst from 850 caliber machine guns is brief and decisive. The Fuhr W-190 explodes. Gabreski lands, examines his engine, and finds no damage. He flies 3 more water injection-assisted combats in January. Each time, the system performs flawlessly. Word spreads through the 56th Fighter Group. Other pilots request the modification. By the end of January, 10 aircraft in the group have been equipped. Then the second modification arrives, the paddle blade propeller. Republic Aviation's original P-47 design used a 4-blade Curtiss electric propeller with narrow, toothpick-like blades. The narrow blades reduced drag but limited the propeller's ability to convert engine power into thrust, particularly at lower speeds and altitudes where air density is higher. Hamilton Standard, another propeller manufacturer, has developed a new design. 4 wide blades, each resembling a paddle, with a diameter of 13 feet. The additional blade area allows the propeller to absorb more power and generate more thrust. The first P-47Ds equipped with paddle blade propellers arrive at the 56th Fighter Group in late January 1944. Test flights reveal dramatic improvements. Rate of climb increases by 800 feet per minute at sea level, 600 feet per minute at 15,000 feet. The gain varies with altitude and power setting, But throughout the combat envelope, the paddle blade propeller enhances performance. Combined with water methanol injection, the improvements are transformative. On February 20, 1944, Gabreski leads his squadron on an escort mission to Brunswick. The formation encounters Bf-110s, twin-engine heavy fighters, armed with rockets intended for use against bomber formations. Gabreski attacks from above, diving on 2 Bf-110s in a single pass. His speed and position are perfect. 8 machine guns converge at 300 yards. Both German aircraft explode. Gabreski pulls up from the attack using water injection. The P-47 climbs at nearly 3,000 feet per minute, regaining altitude to resume escort position. Before water injection and paddle props, such a maneuver would have been impossible. The P-47 would have converted altitude to speed in the dive, then struggled to climb back, burning precious fuel and leaving bombers vulnerable. The 56th Fighter Group's kill ratio begins to shift. In November 1943, the group claimed 22 German aircraft destroyed for the loss of 8 P-47 seconds. In February 1944, with water injection and paddle props, the ratio improves to 37 German aircraft destroyed for the loss of 5 P-47 seconds. The modifications are working, but Republic Aviation and the Army Air Force have not authorized these changes for mass production or field implementation. The water methanol systems are still considered experimental. The paddle blade propellers, while approved for limited testing, have not been cleared for all operational aircraft. The 56th Fighter Group is, by any reasonable interpretation, violating regulations. Colonel Zemke accepts this risk. His pilots are alive. Their kill ratios are improving. Bomber crews are noticing that escorts with the 56th Fighter Group stay with them longer and engage German fighters more aggressively. Zemke receives no official complaints. He continues requesting maintenance that results in more aircraft being modified. Then the third modification arrives, and everything changes again. March 1944, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. A chemical engineer named Robert Brashear examines fuel samples in a laboratory that smells of petroleum and lead compounds. Brashear works for the Army Air Force Materiel Command, testing aviation fuels. The standard fuel, designated 100/130 grade, has been in service since 1942. It represents a triumph of petroleum chemistry. Tetraethyl lead, added at carefully calibrated concentrations, raises the fuel's anti-knock rating, allowing engines to operate at higher compression ratios and manifold pressures without destructive detonation. But Brashear and his colleagues believe they can do better. British chemists have been experimenting with aromatic amine compounds, organic molecules that, when added to gasoline, provide even greater knock resistance than tetraethyl lead alone. A compound called X-Wilidine shows particular promise. It is toxic. It is expensive. It requires special handling, but in laboratory tests, fuel containing xylidine and other aromatic amines demonstrates anti-knock properties equivalent to 150 octane rating in rich mixture conditions. The Army Air Force has been cautious about approving this new fuel. Higher octane allows higher manifold pressures, but higher pressures increase stress on every engine component. Spark plugs foul more rapidly. Exhaust valves operate at temperatures that accelerate wear. Piston rings lose tension faster. Engine overhaul intervals decrease. The maintenance burden increases significantly. But by March 1944, the strategic situation forces a decision. The Luftwaffe must be destroyed before D-Day. Fighter range must be extended. Fighter performance must be enhanced. The new fuel, designated 100/150 grade, is approved for limited testing. 3 aircraft are selected for the initial trials: a P-38J Lightning, a P-51B Mustang, and a P-47D Thunderbolt. All are relatively early production models, unmodified except for fuel system compatibility checks. The test protocol is simple. Fly the aircraft on standard 100/130 fuel to establish baseline performance. Then fly identical profiles on 100/150 fuel and measure the differences. The P-47D used in the test is equipped with a Pratt and Whitney R2-80063 engine. On 100/130 fuel, maximum allowable manifold pressure is 65 inches of mercury, producing approximately 2,300 horsepower at military power. On 100/150 fuel, engineers authorize 75 inches of mercury. The engine does not explode. Cylinder head temperatures remain within limits. Oil pressure stays stable. The performance gains are immediately measurable. From sea level to 35,000 feet, the P-47D averages 19 miles per hour faster on 100/150 fuel. Rate of climb increases by 410 feet per minute. The aircraft reaches 15,000 feet in 6.2 minutes instead of 7.1 minutes. The difference appears modest in raw numbers, but in combat, those extra seconds and those extra miles per hour translate directly into tactical advantage. More importantly, the higher octane fuel compounds the benefits of water methanol injection. An engine running 100/130 fuel with water injection can safely operate at 72 inches of manifold pressure for 5 minutes. An engine running 100/150 fuel with water injection can operate at 80 inches of manifold pressure for the same duration. The power output approaches 2,700 horsepower. The R2800 engine, designed for 2,000 horsepower continuous operation, is being pushed to 135% of rated power. Pratt and Whitney engineers issue warnings. Such operation will require increased maintenance. Spark plugs must be inspected after every mission and replaced frequently. Piston rings will wear faster. Engine time between overhaul will decrease from 250 hours to approximately 180 hours. These are significant costs, but the alternative is accepting inferior performance against an enemy who will exploit every weakness. In April 1944, the 8th Air Force authorizes operational testing of 100/150 fuel in selected fighter squadrons. The 56th Fighter Group volunteers immediately. By late April, fuel trucks bearing drums marked with purple dye, indicating 100/150 grade, begin arriving at RAF Steeple Morden. Ground crews are instructed in handling procedures. Pilots receive briefings on manifold pressure limits and temperature monitoring. Francis Gabreski's P-47D now incorporates all 3 modifications: water methanol injection for short-duration power boost, paddle blade propeller for improved thrust conversion, high-octane fuel for sustained higher power output. The cumulative effect transforms the aircraft's combat capability. May 22, 1944, Northwest Germany. Gabreski leads his squadron escorting B-17 seconds to bomb marshalling yards. The bomber stream has completed its run and is turning for home when Gabreski spots an airfield below. 20 Focke-Wulf, 190, as are in the traffic pattern, preparing to land after an interception mission. The German formation is vulnerable, aircraft spaced out in landing sequence, flaps extended, speed reduced. Gabreski checks his fuel, sufficient for a brief engagement. He checks his altitude, 18,000 feet. Advantage his. He keys the radio. Blue flight, we're going down. Stay together and watch the flak. The 4 P-47 seconds roll inverted and dive. Speed builds rapidly. 400 miles per hour. 450. 500. The Thunderbolt's exceptional diving performance, always one of its greatest strengths, allows the formation to close the distance before German pilots can react. At 8,000 feet, Gabreski pulls out of the dive, rolls level, and closes on the last. W-190 in the landing pattern. The German pilot, focused on his landing approach, does not see the attack developing. Gabreski's first burst strikes the W-190's engine and wing route. Pieces separate from the German fighter. Smoke trails. The aircraft enters an uncontrolled roll and impacts the ground beside the runway. Gabreski does not watch the crash. He has already shifted his aim to the next W-190 300 yards ahead. This pilot sees the threat and attempts to break off his landing approach. He advances his throttle, retracts flaps, and begins a climbing turn to the left. In October 1943, this maneuver would have succeeded. The P-47, heavy and underpowered at low altitude, could not follow a rapid climb without losing energy and speed. But Gabreski's aircraft in May 1944 is not the P-47 of October 1943. He activates water methanol injection, advances the throttle to emergency power, and follows the Follow 190's climbing turn. The manifold pressure gauge reads 78 inches. The engine's roar changes pitch, becoming a sustained bellow of fury. The acceleration pushes Gabreski back in his seat. The paddle blade propeller converts the immense power into thrust with minimal slippage. The P-47 stays with the Follow 190 through the climbing turn, matching its rate of climb, matching its turn radius. The German pilot glances back, sees the American fighter in impossible position, and attempts a more aggressive maneuver. He rolls right and pulls harder, trying to reverse direction and create separation. The high G turn bleeds energy rapidly. The few W-190's speed drops below 250 miles per hour. Gabreski stays inside the turn, using the P-47's superior power-to-weight ratio enhanced by water injection and high-octane fuel to maintain position. At point-blank range, 200 yards and closing, Gabreski fires. 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns release 400 rounds in a 2-second burst. The combined weight of fire is devastating. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds, burning at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, penetrate the FOF 190's armor, ignite fuel, and detonate ammunition. The German fighter disintegrates. No parachute appears. Gabreski pulls away from the explosion, scans for additional threats, and spots a third W-190 below, attempting to escape at low altitude. This pilot has seen his squadron mates destroyed and has abandoned any thought of landing at the attacked airfield. He is running for his life, diving toward the deck where he hopes ground clutter will mask his aircraft from American radar and where his W-190's superior low-altitude performance might provide an escape route. It is a reasonable tactical decision based on 1943 combat experience. It fails completely against 1944 capability. Gabreski dives after the fleeing German, again using the P-47's excellent diving acceleration. Within 30 seconds, he has closed to firing range. The W-190 pilot, seeing pursuit is inevitable, attempts a defensive brake, turning hard left to force an overshoot. Gabreski cuts inside the turn, firing continuously. The German aircraft takes hits along the fuselage, rolls inverted, and impacts the ground at over 300 miles per hour. 3 kills in 6 minutes. Gabreski climbs back to escort altitude using water injection. His fuel gauge reads 47%. In October 1943, such an engagement would have consumed most of his fuel, forcing an immediate return to base. The higher octane fuel, burned more efficiently at optimal power settings, extends his effective combat time. He remains with the bombers until they cross the German border, then leads his flight home. The mission debriefing reveals that Gabreski's squadron claimed 11 German aircraft destroyed that day, 8 TPW-190s plus 3 others encountered during the bomber escort. The 56th Fighter Group lost no aircraft. The lopsided victory ratio is not unusual anymore. Between March and July 1944, as more P-47Ds receive the 3 modifications, the group's effectiveness increases dramatically. Luftwaffe intelligence officers notice the change and struggle to explain it. Captured German pilots, interrogated by Allied intelligence, provide confused and contradictory reports. Oberleutnant Franz Seiler, shot down in June, tells interrogators, "The American fighters changed in March or April. Same aircraft, different performance. They could stay with us in climbs. They were faster in dives. Most critically, they never ran out of fuel anymore. We used to wait for them to break off around the border. Now they follow us to our own airfields." Another captured pilot, Hauptmann Johann Pichler, is more emphatic. "They turned the Thunderbolt into a jet fighter without a jet engine. How are we supposed to fight that?" The German assessment is not entirely accurate, but it reflects the psychological impact of the modifications. Luftwaffe tactical doctrine, developed over 2 years of combat experience, suddenly stops working. Tactics that reliably defeated P-47 seconds in 1943 fail in 1944, German fighter leaders issue new guidance, warning pilots not to assume they can outclimb American escorts, not to assume escorts will turn back at the border, not to assume anything about American fighter capabilities. The modifications' impact extends beyond individual combat. Strategic planners at 8th Air Force Headquarters analyze mission results and reach startling conclusions. In the first quarter of 1944, before widespread implementation of the three modifications, bomber losses average 3.8% per mission. In the second quarter, with modified P-47 seconds providing escort, losses drop to 1.6% per mission. The reduction represents thousands of lives saved, hundreds of bombers preserved, and exponentially greater bomb tonnage delivered to German targets. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Major General James Doolittle, commanding 8th Air Force, makes a critical strategic decision in March 1944. He changes fighter tactics, authorizing escorts to leave bomber formations and pursue German fighters aggressively. Previously, fighters stayed close to bombers, reacting to attacks but not initiating combat. The new directive reads, "Destroy the Luftwaffe, go find them and kill them." The modified P-47 seconds, with enhanced performance and extended combat time, make this aggressive doctrine possible. German losses accelerate. In March 1944, the Luftwaffe loses 412 fighters over Germany. In April, 506. In May, 693. The numbers represent not just aircraft but pilots. Trained, experienced fighter pilots who cannot be replaced quickly. German training programs cannot produce replacements at the required rate. New pilots arrive at frontline squadrons with 60 hours of flight time, facing American pilots with 300 hours or more. The attrition becomes unsustainable. By June 1944, when Allied forces invade Normandy, the Luftwaffe's day fighter force is effectively broken. On D-Day, June 6th, Allied aircraft fly more than 14,000 sorties over the invasion beaches. German aircraft fly fewer than 300 sorties. The disparity is so overwhelming that General Dwight Eisenhower can tell Allied troops, "If you see fighting aircraft over you, they will be ours." The modified P-47 is not solely responsible for this outcome. P-51 Mustangs, with their longer range, contribute significantly. P-38 Lightnings, P-47 seconds stablemate, add their capabilities. British Spitfires and Typhoons dominate the Caen. Tactical air war over France. Thousands of factors contribute to Allied air superiority, but the P-47's transformation from barely adequate to exceptional represents a critical component of victory. Francis Gabreski continues flying combat missions through June and July 1944. By early July, his score stands at 28 confirmed kills, making him America's leading ace in Europe. He has flown 166 combat sorties, more than the 300 hours officially required for rotation home. His wedding to Kay Cochran is scheduled. His hometown of Oil City, Pennsylvania, has raised $2,000 for a wedding present. Transport is arranged to fly him home on July 20th. On July 19th, Gabreski hears that a mission is scheduled for the following day. He has officially completed his tour. He does not need to fly, but bomber crews will go into danger, and he knows the mission profile. He requests permission to fly one more escort mission. The operations officer approves reluctantly. July 20th, 1944, near Koblenz, Germany. The bomber escort mission is routine. No German fighters intercept. The bombers complete their run. Gabreski's flight is about to return to England when he spots an airfield below. German aircraft are visible on the ground. He makes a decision, a strafing pass, one final attack before going home. The P-47 dives toward the airfield. Gabreski opens fire on parked aircraft, his guns raking hangar buildings and fuel storage tanks. He pulls up from the attack, preparing for a second pass, but he has misjudged his altitude by perhaps 20 feet. The P-47's propeller strikes the ground, just one blade tip, just a momentary contact, but at 300 miles per hour, the impact is catastrophic. The propeller, unbalanced by the damaged blade, begins vibrating violently. The engine mounts, stressed beyond design limits, begin to fail. Gabreski shuts down the engine and searches for a landing. At sight, he spots a field and manages a controlled crash landing. The P-47's legendary structural strength protects him. He climbs from the cockpit shaken but uninjured. For 5 days, Gabreski evades capture, hiding in woods and moving at night. But German patrols are thorough. On July 25th, a policeman apprehends him and turns him over to the military. He is sent to an interrogation center at Oberursel, then to Stalag Luft I, a prison camp on the Baltic Sea. When the camp is liberated in May 1945, Gabreski weighs 130 pounds, down from 170. He has spent 10 months as a prisoner of war because of a 20-foot error in altitude judgment. The irony is bitter. The modifications that made his P-47 so capable, the water injection, the paddle props, the high-octane fuel, could not save him from his own mistake. But those modifications continued serving other pilots. By August 1944, virtually all P-47D models in 8th Air Force service incorporate water methanol injection and paddle blade propellers. High-octane 100/150 fuel becomes standard for fighter operations in the European theatre. The cumulative impact is measurable in brutal mathematics. Bomber loss rates in October 1943, 8.9% per mission. Bomber loss rates in October 1944, 1.2% per mission. That difference represents 6,840 lives saved over 12 months of operations. 68 complete bomber crews who walk away from the war instead of dying over Germany. Technical post-war assessments credit the modified P-47 as one of the most significant tactical developments of the air war. The Army Air Force's official history notes, the introduction of water methanol injection, improved propellers, and high-octane fuel transformed the P-47 from a high-altitude interceptor into an effective air superiority fighter throughout the entire fort. Combat envelope. But Gabreski's story is one among thousands. The modifications that changed his P-47 changed the war for every pilot who flew the type. Lieutenant Colonel David Schilling, Gabreski's fellow ace in the 56th Fighter Group, exploits the improved performance throughout the summer of 1944. On a single mission in August, he engages a formation of Bf-109Gs at 12,000 feet. Using water injection, he matches their climb rate, destroys 2 in a climbing engagement, then pursues a third that attempts to escape by diving. The maneuver would have succeeded 6 months earlier. In August 1944, Schilling's modified P-47 stays with the German fighter through the dive, through a desperate climbing reversal, and through a final turning fight that ends with the Bf-109 in pieces. Schilling lands with his engine smoking, coolant temperature in the red zone, spark plugs fouled by the extreme power settings. Ground crews replace all 18 spark plugs, inspect the cylinders for damage, and clear the aircraft for flight the next day. The maintenance burden is exactly as Pratt and Whitney engineers predicted, but Schilling is alive, 3 more German fighters are destroyed, and the bomber formation he escorted suffered no losses. This becomes the pattern. Modified P-47 seconds require more maintenance. Engine overhaul intervals decrease. Spark plug consumption increases by a factor of 5. Ground crews work longer hours, but mission success rates improve, bomber losses decline, and pilot survival rates increase. The trade is accepted because the alternative is unacceptable. The German response reveals the modification's psychological impact. Luftwaffe combat reports from summer 1944 repeatedly reference American fighters with apparently improved engines or enhanced performance characteristics. German intelligence attempts to determine if the Allies have deployed new aircraft types. They have not. The P-47D airframe remains unchanged, but performance has transformed so dramatically that German pilots believe they face new opponents. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, makes a bitter observation in a conference with Hitler recorded by stenographers. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." He might have added Thunderbolts to that statement. Modified P-47 seconds, with their improved range enabled by more efficient fuel consumption at optimal power settings, escort bombers to targets throughout Germany. The Toten Zone, the death zone where bombers flew unescorted, ceases to exist. By September 1944, the Luftwaffe's day fighter force has effectively ceased functioning as a coordinated defense. German pilots fly only when absolutely necessary, husbanding dwindling fuel supplies and irreplaceable trained personnel. The statistics tell the story with merciless clarity. In September 1943, before the modifications, the Luftwaffe claimed 197 American bombers and fighters destroyed over Germany. In September 1944, with modified aircraft dominating the sky, the Luftwaffe claims 41. The cost of the modifications extends beyond maintenance hours and spark plugs. 3 P-47 pilots die when their engines fail during high-power operation. 2 aircraft are lost when water methanol injection systems malfunction, flooding the engine with raw methanol that causes catastrophic detonation. 1 pilot bails out successfully. 1 does not. These are acceptable losses in the cold calculus of war, but they are losses nonetheless. Each death represents someone's son, someone's husband, someone's father who will not come home. The modifications also reveal uncomfortable truths about military bureaucracy. Colonel Zemke's decision to install water methanol systems without explicit authorization technically violates regulations. The use of 100/150 fuel before official approval constitutes unauthorized operation outside established parameters. The rapid adoption of paddle blade propellers bypasses normal testing and certification procedures. In peacetime, such actions would result in courts-martial. In wartime, they result in decorations. This contradiction troubles some officers. Major General Barney Giles, Deputy Commander of Army Air Forces, questions whether field modifications should be permitted without central authority approval. He argues that uncontrolled modifications could lead to catastrophic failures, that safety protocols exist for valid reasons, that discipline requires adherence to regulations even under combat pressure. His concerns are legitimate. His timing is unfortunate. By the time Giles raises these objections in May 1944, modified P-47 seconds have been flying combat for 4 months, have achieved demonstrable success, and have the enthusiastic support of every pilot who flies them. Lieutenant General Carl Spaatz, commanding United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe, ends the debate with a terse memorandum. Results speak for themselves. Modified aircraft show superior performance. Losses are acceptable. Maintenance burden is manageable. Continue current operations. Expedite modifications to all units. The regulations that Zemke technically violated are quietly amended. The modifications become official policy retroactively. The paperwork catches up with reality. This pattern innovation from the field, initial resistance from headquarters, eventual acceptance based on results repeats throughout the war. The modified B-25 Strafer that Paul Gunn developed in the Pacific faces similar bureaucratic resistance before General George Kenney authorizes its use. The long-range fuel tanks that extend P-51 range are initially rejected as creating excessive drag before combat results prove their worth. War rewards results, not procedure. The challenge is distinguishing valuable innovation from reckless experimentation. The post-war analysis attempts to quantify the modification's impact. Army Air Forces historians compile data from thousands of combat reports, maintenance logs, and pilot debriefings. Their conclusions, published in 1947, credit the 3 modifications with increasing P-47 combat effectiveness by approximately 37%. The calculation methodology is complex, factoring kill ratios, mission success rates, bomber protection effectiveness, and pilot survival statistics. The precise number is less important than the magnitude. The modifications did not add 50 miles per hour in level flight. That title claim is hyperbole. But they added something more valuable: flexibility, options, capability across the entire combat envelope. A P-47D with water injection, paddle props, and high-octane fuel cannot outrun an FW-190A at sea level. But it can match the German fighter's climb rate for the critical 5-minute window of combat. It can maintain energy in vertical maneuvers. It can engage, disengage, and re-engage on favorable terms. These capabilities transform the Thunderbolt from a specialized high-altitude interceptor into an effective air superiority fighter at all altitudes. The technology does not end with World War II. Modern 100 aviation gasoline, the blue fuel used in piston aircraft worldwide, descends directly from wartime high-octane formulations. The chemical compounds developed by Robert Brashear and his colleagues, the aromatic amines, the carefully balanced additive packages inform current fuel specifications. Private pilots flying Cessnas and Pipers in the 21st century use fuel technology pioneered under wartime pressure in 1944. Water methanol injection systems continue in military and civilian aviation for decades after the war. The Korean War sees F-86 Sabres equipped with water injection for enhanced performance during combat. The Vietnam War sees A-1 Sky Raiders and other piston-powered aircraft using advanced versions of the same technology. Even modern turbine engines employ water injection in specific applications, particularly for takeoff power augmentation in hot conditions. The principal inject a fluid that cools the intake charge and increases density remains valid across generations of propulsion technology. The human stories persist as well. Francis Gabreski survives his imprisonment, returns home in May 1945, marries Kay Cochran on June 11th, and resumes his Air Force career. He flies F-86 Sabres in Korea, shoots down 6.5 MiG-15 seconds, and becomes one of the few pilots to achieve ace status in 2 wars and in both propeller and jet aircraft. He retires as a colonel in 1967, works in the aviation industry for 20 years, and dies in January 2002 at age 83. His legacy includes not just his 28 World War II victories and 6.5 Korean War victories, but his role in testing and validating the modifications that changed the P-47. Colonel Hubert Zemke, who authorized the initial unofficial modifications, continues commanding the 56th Fighter Group through October 1944. He is shot down during a mission and spends 7 months as a prisoner of war. After the war, he writes extensively about air combat tactics and the importance of field innovation. His book, Zemke's Wolfpack, details the 56th Fighter Group's operations and explicitly credits the water methanol injection, paddle props, and high-octane fuel for the unit's success. He dies in 1994, remembered as one of the finest fighter leaders of World War II. The engineers receive less recognition but deserve equal credit. Arthur Smith and Donald Hersey, the Pratt and Whitney engineers who perfected water methanol injection, continue working in aviation propulsion after the war. Their patents on injection systems become foundation documents for post-war engine development. Robert Brashear, the fuel chemist who tested high-octane formulations, works in petroleum engineering through the 1960s, contributing to aviation fuel specifications that remain in use today. These men never flew combat missions, never faced enemy fire, never earned distinguished flying crosses, but their work saved lives just as certainly as any fighter pilot's gun camera footage. The broader lesson concerns the relationship between innovation and regulation. Military organizations require standardization for logistics, maintenance, and training. Regulations exist for valid safety and operational reasons, but rigid adherence to regulations can prevent necessary adaptation to changing circumstances. The modifications that transformed the P-47 violated regulations. They also won the air war over Europe. The challenge is creating organizational cultures that can distinguish between reckless, rule-breaking, and necessary innovation. The 56th Fighter Group provides a model. Colonel Zemke does not ignore regulations randomly. He evaluates each proposed modification, consults with technical experts, conducts careful testing, and monitors results closely. When water methanol injection proves safe and effective, he expands its use. When a proposed modification shows problems, he halts implementation immediately. His approach is methodical, data-driven, and focused on results rather than blind adherence to doctrine. This balancing act, respecting regulations while remaining open to necessary changes, defines effective military leadership. Generals who never bend rules often preside over stagnant, ineffective organizations. Generals who ignore rules entirely create chaos. The finest leaders understand which rules serve essential purposes and which rules prevent necessary adaptation. By war's end in May 1945, modified P-47 seconds have flown over 500,000 combat sorties. They have destroyed 6,284 enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground. They have dropped 132,000 tons of bombs. They have lost 5,222 aircraft, representing a loss rate of 0.7% per mission, the lowest of any American fighter type in Europe. These statistics represent not just machines, but people. Pilots who flew into combat knowing their modified aircraft gave them better odds. Bomber crews who survived because escorts stayed with them longer. Ground personnel who maintained the aircraft through brutal winters and endless work shifts. The titles claim that one engineer's illegal fuel mix made P-47 seconds outrun Fevler 190s by 50 miles per hour is not literally accurate. No single engineer created the modifications. Multiple individuals contributed. The fuel mix, while unauthorized initially, was not precisely illegal, and the modifications did not add 50 miles per hour to top speed. But the title captures a deeper truth. Unauthorized innovations, implemented by determined individuals who refused to accept inadequate performance, transformed an aircraft type from barely adequate to war-winning. That transformation saved thousands of lives and contributed materially to Allied victory. The story's final irony is that the modifications succeeded precisely because they addressed real problems. Water methanol injection answered pilots' desperate need for better climb performance. Paddle blade propellers solved the thrust conversion problem that limited low-altitude capability. High-octane fuel enabled higher continuous power output. Each modification targeted a specific, documented deficiency. None were implemented on speculation or theory alone. All were tested, validated, and refined based on combat experience. This is how wars are won, not through brilliant strategy alone, though strategy matters, not through overwhelming resources alone, though resources matter, but through thousands of incremental improvements, each addressing specific problems, each validated by results, each implemented by individuals willing to take risks in service of victory. The modified P-47 represents one such improvement among many, but it is an improvement that changed outcomes, saved lives, and demonstrated what is possible when necessity meets opportunity and when talented people refuse to accept failure. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.